Hello, writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Ihsan.
And I'm Eric Mertz.
And this is episode 70 of the podcast. And it's May 31st, 2022, as we record this. Our main topic today is passive voice and sentence structure. Such a sexy topic, but totally necessary.
Yes.
The podcast is sponsored by our patrons at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. For as low as $1 a month, you can get a shout out on the podcast, and we can make announcements for you on the podcast. At other tiers, the benefits increase to free books, accountability calls, scene analysis, mastermind calls, and free retreat tickets. Become a patron of the arts at patreon.com/Valerie Ihsan. Hey, Eric, what's up, man?
Not much.
¿Qué pasa? I'm going to Spanish class tonight.
Oh, don't use it on me. I don't know much Spanish. It's a beautiful day. I have nothing else to say other than I wish they were all this beautiful.
I know. I was reading about Costa Rica today, so. So yes, the sun is glorious right now. And for Willamette Valley, that is not often the case.
No, but hopefully from here, let's just get 3 months of this, 4 months of this.
But it won't. It's going to rain all through June. And
it's true.
And then in July and August, we'll get fires. And
well, you're rosy this morning, this afternoon.
I am reading this really cool book. It's called 7 Steeples by Sara Baume. She's an Irish writer. And it's such an interesting, like even the format of this book is just charmingly interesting. And it's written like you'd have to get the hardcover for it or the print copy, because it's got a layout to it, almost like poetry. It's not overdone, but you wouldn't be able to see it in an ebook. But yeah, I'm really liking it. And it's very setting heavy. It's all about this mountain that these two people live on. And yeah, it's just, I'm happy that I'm reading it right now, because I'm about ready to go. On Thursday, I'm going to go into the settings pass on my manuscript. So I'm really glad that I'm reading this right now, because, I can get a feel for that micro attention on setting, and I'm excited about it. And then after that,
do you find when you're writing, let's say you're focusing on an aspect of something, do you feel like if you read something that focuses on that area, that it affects your writing? Do you allow
but in a good
read?
way? Yes.
Right.
Not that I'm copying, but kind of you are, I mean, you're making it your own, you're influenced. Yeah. And right. Not even so much in the voice or the style, but it's just like brainstorming with a friend, you get ideas that you wouldn't have before, and you're kind of like riffing off of each other. So it's not like you're copying, but you're, being influenced, I suppose.
I'm sure the author, what is it? Sara Baume?
Baume. I think that's.
I'm sure if you told Sara that you were reading this book and you felt like you were riffing off of her style, she'd be pleased.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm sure she would.
That's true. Maybe I'll send her a little tweet.
Oh, do that. Do that.
It'd be like
writing is lonely.
Mini fan mail. It is. And I like getting any kind of fan mail, even if it's like, hey, I just subscribed, or thanks for writing this, or I was at the bookstore. And I do sell a handful, like it trickles out of my novel at the bookstore. And there's a cute little sign that says staff, I can't even say it, staff author. Wow. THs and Fs right next to each other.
Right. Yeah, that was a jumble.
So, but yeah, one of our regular customers came in and said, oh, I read your book. It was so good. So that was really wonderful.
Oh, that had to be a great day. Yeah.
That was a great day.
I would have been walking on sunshine on my way home if that was the case. That's terrific.
It's been a good week.
Good.
And after I'm done with 7 Steeples, who knows, of course, everything has a potential to jump the stack, but I feel like not super drawn to any thing right now. So I want to read a couple of little things and kind of get them out of the way. Do you know what I mean? So I have this tiny little book called What to Do When You Don't Have a Book Coming Out, and even more sage advice.
That can't be real. That can't be real. You need
It's
to put
totally
that in
book.
the
I'm
show
holding
notes. Oh,
the
you're
book
holding
up.
it up.
I'm holding up
Wow.
the book.
That's
It's by Angela Slatter. And then there's also this book called The Dreamer, or just Dreamer. And it's just an ARC copy that I have. So
cool.
I don't know. And it's a YA fantasy, I think. It's just a short book, like maybe 150 pages, not even. So I think that'll be fun to get out of the way, or not out of the way, but
right.
it'll
It's
be a
fun to
quick
read short
read.
things and quick reads.
And
Yeah.
so I still have that finishing energy kind of flying around. I finished listening to Writing Scenes, that book that J. Thorn wrote that I
Right.
contributed to. And the link to that is in the show notes. And let's see, what else did I finish? I finished the Once and Future Witches. That was really good.
Oh wow, you're moving that list up on
I
Goodreads.
did. And I
You're
also
bulking up.
finished listening to, I listened to an audiobook called My Mess is a Bit of a Life. It was fantastic. It was so great. It was funny and heartbreaking, and just, it was so great. And I really loved the narrator. She reminded me of, dude, I wonder if it really was her. I didn't even look, but it reminded me of that. She's a British actress. She, I'm going to have to, when you're talking, I'm going to look her up on the IMDb, whatever that's called, the movie database thing. Because I can't even remember the names of the movies that she's been in. But anyway, she's whatever. This voice was great. I really loved it. And it was really funny. It's a essays. It's a memoir on anxiety.
Oh, that's
So
a great title.
It was
Fabulous.
great.
I don't always feel like when you switch the words, in the saying, that it always makes such a great title. But that one, I like that. I think that worked really well.
That was something she accidentally said at the therapist's office. It sort of like came out wrong, and
a happy accident.
It worked.
Gotta love it. Well, I am finished with Cloud Cuckoo Land. Finally.
Do you want to say more about that on air?
I'm going to say that
you can plead the fifth if you want.
No, I'm not that kind of. I'm not that kind of person. You know that. The last 100 pages of the book were quite compelling. I definitely felt like I was more swept in to the story. I felt things were starting to coalesce, and I had that. What do they call? What does Mark Dawson call his books? Unput downable. It had that unput downable quality that I liked. Actually finished it yesterday while we were getting ready to have people come over, and my wife was bustling around making the salad. And I'm normally a very active kitchen person, but this instance I was just not. So I was finishing that up. And I would say that when you're that author, when you're Anthony Doerr and you are that author, and you wrote, your last book was All the Light We Cannot See, you get to write that book. I think that's the permission the world gives you. And I'm glad I read it, and I would recommend it. It's just, you do have to engage it on a stylistic level. You do. There's just no way you can read it on a purely story level and enjoy it. I think you have to sit down and sort of like understand that you're under the influence of an author who is a master, a master craftsman. So I will. And I got it from the library, and then I'm sure if I see it on a bookshelf somewhere at a bookstore, I'll pick it up to have it, because I may read it again. This is typical of me, right? So yeah, I'm done with that, and I'm going to dive into some Bukowski after this, because I need something quick and a little less stylish. I need something a little grittier. So we were talking about grit the other day, and I think that I'm going to jump in on some of that. And I went to the library on Saturday, and I grabbed like 3 books, and that was just the indicator that it was time. I got that appetite. I've been reading one book for about a week and a half, 2 weeks. And like my brain started like, okay, there's other books out there, there's other fish in the sea. Let's go grab one of them. So yeah, I'm glad to be done with it. And I'll reflect more on it too. I think but it's definitely, speaking about what we were talking about with is not going to influence me at all as a writer. I just can't think of story in those terms. So I won't be writing a big fractured 500-page novel that takes place in 3 centuries and across space and time.
In terms of being influenced by other writers, I think it's more word choice for me, or like the rhythm of the sentences, as opposed to like the structure of a book or something.
Yeah, I
thought that's what you were referring to before.
That was
okay.
Yeah. That happens to me, I really brought it up because when I read Raymond Carver, that Raymond Carver sentence, which is just, it's kind of a Hemingway sentence. It's that short. It's just very punchy. It's just not a word of fat on there. It's just as lean as it gets. Like, I find myself trying to write like that, even though that's not my style. After I read Raymond Carver, I start turning into one of those guys. But did you find the name of the actress?
No, I was too distracted by the dogs barking.
Oh, well,
I'll find it and put it in the show notes.
Well, that was an active sentence. I will find it, right? And put it in the show notes, right? That's active voice. Let's talk about passive voice. Because this, as a writer, I'll be honest, when I get feedback from people, like from editors and I actually have somebody in my writing group who gives passive feedback comments. I in the writing moment can't really see it. I don't see it.
Well,
it's hard for me.
So if you want to get like super nitty gritty, so here's the grammar part. The active voice means that a sentence has a subject that acts on its verb.
Right.
And the passive voice means that the subject is the recipient of a verb's action. So it's kind of, it's the dude isn't doing the thing is being done to the dude.
Mona Lisa was painted by Leonardo da Vinci as passive, right?
Yes.
Active is Leonardo da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa.
Yes. I had an example that was much more banal. I liked yours much better.
What was your example?
The ball was thrown by the pitcher. The ball is the subject and it receives the action of the verb, and was thrown is in its passive voice. So if you write it in active voice, it's the pitcher threw the ball.
Right.
So that's the weedy part of this discussion. But yeah, it's a lot of people, we talk in passive voice, I think.
Often, yes.
Often. And so when you're writing your first draft, it's just going to come out passively. A lot of it, may do that. And so when I'm doing a story diagnostic on someone's manuscript, I don't look at passive voice at that time. But it is something that's really...
Why not? Why don't you do that?
Because line editing isn't a thing that you do at that story diagnostic level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which makes sense, right? If you're still trying to work the story out and the characters and the scene and the setting, the last thing you need to be focused on is sentence structure. That makes a lot of sense. Plus,
you might not keep that sentence. You don't want to go in and sometimes clients come to me before they're ready and they want a line edit. And I'm like, oh, well, really, this other stuff needs to be helped first before you can go in, because you might not even use this chapter at all. You might end up changing it completely and rewriting it from a different point of view even, or something like that. So don't worry about the passive voice, I guess, at first, but definitely at the line editing stage, I would, if you can, try to self-edit that even before you get it to your line editor, if possible. And there's the software that I like to use is Pro Writing Aid. Right. Affiliate link in the show notes.
And you brought it up when we talked about tools that you use. That was in there.
Yeah, I do use that. And that picks up passive. It'll show you when you're using passive voice. And sometimes, again, because it is a natural speech, a lot of times, sometimes I'll leave it that way. But I try to take most of it out because it's just not as strong.
No. And your example is, I think, the perfect example the pitcher threw the ball is so it's just it's the action. It's you can illustrate that sentence in your head, even if you don't know what a baseball game looks like.
Yeah.
You know that somebody throwing the ball, what that looks like. It's the other thing that the ball was thrown by the pitcher.
Yeah.
I mean, when you put it that way, I mean, and think of the word usage too. I mean, there's more words in that passive sentence. You have to use more words to articulate the same idea. And it's in that instance, you wouldn't, that just makes no sense to write it that way.
Also,
when oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say a little, like a hint, I guess, if you're trying to find it yourself in your writing, this isn't always the case, but if you find those to be verbs,
oh yeah,
or had or was, or those things tend to find their way into passive voice. So if you see those words in your writing, that often shows signs of, if not passive voice, then at least sentences that are not super active. And what I mean by that is, are not active. I want to say powerful, like strong. For instance, I walked to the store is always going to be more powerful than I was walking to the store.
Right.
So anytime you see those little wases or had beens or M's or whatever, those sometimes will show where you've picked up some passive voice.
Right. That makes sense. I was going to say, there's times when you would use it, right? There's sparing places you'd want to use it. I was doing a little research on this because I'm, less the editor and the line editor than, but when the subject is unknown, right? Or the actor in the sentence is unknown. An example I found was, the cave paintings were made in the Stone Age. If you don't know who painted them, you can't say, you really wouldn't say speculate. So the sentence, when the actor is unknown, you need it there, or the actor is irrelevant. That can be sometimes the case. But these are rare instances, right? I mean, you're not.
I think that some genres lend themselves more. I mean, like academic writing, is more fraught with like, oh, we don't want to actually say who's responsible for this, but the team. Yeah. So there would be places where that kind of writing is more expected, and so it won't throw the reader out as much.
And in dialogue too, right? If characters are speaking, I always love it when like a grammar checker, grabs something in a sentence and identifies a problem when it's, people don't speak in perfect active voiced English. So having those mistakes, you may want to look and see if you have a character that's consistently coming up with, with grammatical errors or passive voice, you may want to look at that. But by and large, people speak the way they speak, and they're not always direct. They're sometimes speculative.
Yes.
I also know that if you're a blogger, if you're blogging at all and you use Yoast on your blogs on WordPress, they will identify passive voice, too much passive voice. So you can go in and actually highlight the sentences you do that. So there's safeguards there as well.
That's cool. That's
always helpful. That's the only time I'm really good with it, because I'll just hit that little checker and it'll go through, and I'm usually relying on a line editor. So
and I leave a little bit in there.
It's a challenge, right? Because I think that when you think about sentence, I mean, the bigger topic here, and I'm sure we'll address it in other podcasts, is that sentence structure is a big part of the writing experience for the reader, right? Absolutely. It's the flow of the sentence, it's the poetry, it's the voice. But you as a writer, the challenge is like making, those, when to really be focusing on the line, I think is a question we have to ask ourselves. And, it's not early on. It's probably sometime when the story is set, the scenes are set, and you are now working on that, the smaller units, right? The sentences and things.
Yeah.
And I think you could get really distracted if you were thinking that way too early, if you were really trying to write that line in the most perfect way. you might lose the story there.
Well, yeah, because I think different parts of your brain are activated when you're creating something versus when you're using that more frontal lobe, like, is this the
When
right
you're
decision? Yeah, when you're revising and editing and making it sound good. And you don't want to, I mean, not that your rough drafts are like journal entries, but you certainly don't want to be like editing your journal entries and not wanting to write down something because you think it'll sound bad. That really stops the flow
right,
of creating. So yeah, you can't, which is why we talked about this before. This why I left that critique group after 10 years. I mean, having a critique group was vital to me, becoming a writer and finding my tribe and learning how to take constructive criticism and learning how to give it. And, I recommend it and having that experience. And yet there is a time when, you may grow out of that. And
right,
that was why I left, because I was bringing that rough first, second draft to the critique partners who were then line editing it and looking for that stuff like passive voice and sentence structure before it was ready,
right.
while I was still creating, before even the macro stuff needed to be looked at, and they were already micro editing, and yeah, that didn't work. So
And
yes, there definitely is a time to look at sentence structure. And when you're first drafting, that's not the time.
no. And you said something earlier, you use that term finishing energy. I think we've thrown that around a little bit in a few podcasts, and that is the finishing, like that's the finishing part of writing, is the sentence structure. It's not the creation energy. And I'm at a pass in a draft right now where I'm doing those lines, and it just feels different. It feels
It's
there's
fun. I
that.
mean, I like that
Yeah,
too. I'm at
yeah,
that place too. And there is that. So I guess I'm in the border, the cusp, I guess, of the looking for passive voice, because like I
right,
said, this next on, I think Thursday, that's when I'm going to start going through my settings pass. And so I'm going to start at the beginning of the manuscript and just be like, okay, this is scene 1.
right,
And does it have theme? Does it have setting? Does it have sensory details? How do I make this little scene package look awesome and make all the words beautiful? Check. Okay, scene 2. It's
right,
going to take a little
right,
while because I'm going to be shifting and nuancing and moving things around and changing the sentence structure to allow for, like you said, the poetry and the rhythm, the sound of it. Does it sound okay when I read it out loud? And so
right. The
it's
color,
more.
the flavor.
And
Yeah,
this is why line editing costs so much, really, because it takes so long, because a line editor was going to, look through every single sentence and make sure that obviously the grammar is there and that there's no typos, but also, does it work here? I mean, sometimes I move one sentence to the bottom of the paragraph because it would be better if it ended with that sentence instead of began with that sentence.
right,
It's pretty
right.
nitpicky stuff. So I think this next pass will actually, unfortunately, take a little while because I'm going to be creating and editing at the same time.
Right.
So that's interesting.
That's going to be a balance. Yeah. I think of that line that often gets attributed to Hemingway, where he says, like, write drunk and edit sober. And I think that's sort of, I'm not, but I think there's some wisdom to that, right?
Yeah.
Write free spirited with
Mhm.
with none of the, with none of the shackles on your writing. And then when it comes time to edit, then you need to be a little more, you know,
Brutal.
brutal. Yeah. You have to be. Yeah, and it's an odd mind set to be in when you're looking at your work and you're like flipping those sentences around, but it's necessary. What else can we say about passive voice? I mean, do you think it's something? Okay, let me ask a question, because I is it curable? Like, is a writer that's given to being heavy in the passive voice in their early drafts, is it something you can root out, or is it something worth trying to root out in your writing, or is it
Of
just
course. I mean, it's just a skill
okay?
like anything else. So
Okay,
um, I think using those things like the Yoast server that you were talking about, or Pro Writing Aid or Grammarly or any of those software
like programs
things.
and things.
Yeah, programs. Thank you. I think the word. Any of those programs that look for that and can identify it for you. So then, of course, that would be the first step, would be identifying when am I doing it, and knowing if you tend to do it. You know, if you put your manuscript through one of those programs and see all of this shading that's pointing out like every other sentence is that way. Oh, okay. Then obviously I have, that's one of the challenges or weaknesses in my writing. And just knowing that in itself is valuable. So then, when you're writing your rough draft, that you need to save time in the editing process to address specifically the passive voice. And maybe that's the first thing that you do after you've got the story locked up and set. Then maybe you can do a passive voice editing pass and check for that. And so, yeah, when you have a program that points out the sentence and shows this is in passive voice, then you would look at it and reconstruct it in your head and rewrite it to an active voice. And then pretty soon you'll start seeing how that works. And then you'll begin writing that way instead of having to fix it later, because it's just a learned habit, I think.
And it comes like everything else we talk about. These things, the first time you try will be different than your second draft, your third draft, your fourth, your second book, I think each time you sit down and actively pursue writing, the craft of writing, you will find ways to, and you might not be conscious of it. I think I've gotten a little better with the passive voice, but I haven't been at it. I'm not sitting there at that genesis stage of writing and saying, more active voice, more active voice, more active voice. I think that the constant revision, the brain tries to find a shortcut. Like, I don't want to keep revising these. How might I just figure out a different way to write it? That's good. I mean, I think that's one of the things people need to understand, is that skill is something you will accumulate, and it will lead to better writing. And it won't, if you're getting back a draft, something from a line editor and it's full of passive voice remarks, take that like a lesson and as a skill building place and move from there.
Yeah, I have this is kind of unrelated, but not. So that book that Jay Thorn just wrote, Writing Scenes. So I just ordered the workbook. So the whole workbook is just full of like the scene rubric pages. So I'm going to go through my manuscript and do it scene by scene. And it's going to take a long time, I imagine. And I'll slog through, but I'll make the manuscript so much better that it'll be worth it. And I'm going to do that with the workbook, every single manuscript from here on out, until I don't need to anymore, until it becomes intrinsic and I don't think about it and it just comes out in my drafting process. And, I can check it, but I won't need the workbook and I won't need the steps, and you know what I mean? Right.
You're exercising, and that's what we're doing every time we sit down to write. It's a new exercise. It's a new, you're getting better and better and better.
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's probably the most important takeaway, really. It's a skill. Yeah. You can learn how to not do it. That's kind of a reverse skill. And being aware.
Understand sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you didn't. Just being aware. That's all I meant to say.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to say, and also just know that you're not alone. Again, if you're getting those comments from people, it's not an indictment on your ability to ever write well. It's just an indication of a piece of the writing puzzle that we need to work on. You need to work on. And just so don't lose, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? You don't want to lose a great story can have sentence issues. Just work on them.
And because, like you said, we do talk that way. And so it's natural for you to like slip into that verbiage, that passive voice when you're drafting. So
as we've been sitting here, I've been like, okay,
listening.
I was in passive voice. Am I speaking in passive voice right now? Passive voice was spoken by the podcast co-host. We should get a
That's
transcript of this and then run it through Pro
Pro
Writing
Writing
Aid and
Aid.
see what it says.
Post it in the show notes. That's funny. Oh, well, I think that's probably all I have to say about passive voice and sentence structure. Don't worry about it at the beginning. Fix it later. Make sure you fix it later.
Right.
Know that it's going to slip out because it's a normal speech. It's a skill that you can acquire through practice, and it's just one of the passes that you need to concentrate on when you're in the editing phases.
Right. And that there is in some places, there's places that passive voice works. And if it's one of those instances, don't correct dialogue, because if it sounds naturalistic, dialogue is going to have instances of passive voice. So
and I mean, the whole purpose of this is so that the reader does not slip out of the story. You know, if they clunk on a sentence because it's passive, or it pulls them out of the story
because the ball was thrown by the pitcher and it doesn't capture the
you
energy.
Just can't see that.
Yeah.
And so you want your words to be dynamic and to paint that picture. And if the reader gets pulled out of the story, then they'll be more likely to put the book down. And so passive voice is just or sentences that are not dynamic and have powerful verb choices are going to be more likely to be put down by the reader, which is in passive voice.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
I was in the middle of the sentence and thought, how can I make this active? Crap, I can't. Okay.
And you were editing it. Well, and I love that what you said, and I think that's something we consistently come back to, and I think coming back to it in this subject is important. Writers are in service of their readers. That's what we're here to do. We're here to deliver to that person who makes the commitment to buy your book, download your book, take a chance on your short story, whatever it is. We're serving them. And if we don't give them what they want, they're going to go find it somewhere else. So if you want to serve those readers and bring them back, the pitcher throws the ball. And that may be just the skill you need to get there.
Nice. Well, I want to end with some announcements, which we didn't do at the beginning of the podcast.
Okay.
And I think you have an announcement about Chasing Shadows. You sent out an email to your list about
the pre-order's up.
Yay.
It's there, which means that I can feel the
love.
I can feel the finish line. Yeah. So the pre-orders up, which we should have a subject on pre-orders and Amazon. That we should talk about that on a podcast, because it's an interesting process. But it's up, it's ready to go. It's going to be ready to go. It's not ready to go yet, but
when is
August
the
18th.
Pre-order date? August 18th. Okay. That's
August 18th.
Oh, that's exciting. A summer release. So you can go in and read about it now. And actually that's the second or third book in the series. I forget now.
It's technically the third book in the series, but the first book is a collection of shorts. So I think as I build the bookshelf a little bit, it'll end up being the second, because it's the second involving the main character, August Melville.
Okay. So the first book, that's Book of Witness, right? Is that what the first one's called? Is that kind of the zero?
That's a zero book. Yeah.
Okay. So then the first one in the series technically is Permanent Shadows, and that's where you meet Melville, and then this book is Chasing Shadows. Okay. That's exciting. So I just wanted everyone to know about that. August 18th, but you can pre-order now on Amazon.
Get it there.
And then I am going to be in an info stack bundle next week. Comes out June 7th.
Cool.
So next week I'll be able to share the link with you all. I don't have it right now yet. But in the meantime, there is a link in the show notes for a free book from InfoStack entitled Your Hero's Journey: Overcome the Dragons of Dread, Doubt, and Defeat, and Release Your Creative Power as a Writer. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's just a free download, free PDF from InfoStack, and it sounded cool. And so I want to read it. And so I just put the link in the show notes for you to grab. I'll tell you more about the InfoStack later. Little teaser. All right. Next week, we are going to be talking about, I wrote it down here. Where did it go? Next episode, how to keep writing when your kids are home. 'Tis the season. It is going to be June next week. Actually, tomorrow it's going to be June.
Tomorrow's June, yeah.
Tomorrow's June. So I imagine all you writers with kids are frantically worrying about what you're going to do when your kids are home all the time and how you're going to find those little snippets of time to write. So we wanted to talk about that.
Here's a sneak preview of camp. Send them to camp. No, just kidding.
Daycare. All right. Thanks so much for talking with me today, Eric. And I'll see you
Absolutely.
next
Thank
week.
you. See you
Bye
next
now.
week. Bye-bye.